So I'm going to remind you once again the definition of a function, and a function is a graph or a set of ordered pairs in which every x value results in only one value of y. So we never will have repeated x values in a function. And we also talked in a previous video, we introduced you to the idea of domain and range. And domain were all the set of possible x values of your function, and the range is the set of y values of a function. So all the possible input values, that's called the domain, and all the possible output values is called the range. In a previous video, we looked at tables and sets of ordered pairs, and we made lists of domain and range. In this video, we're going to look at some graphs, and from the graphs we want to be able to list what is the domain and what is the range of the function. So here are some graphs we're going to take a look at, and we're going to use the graph of each function to find the domain and range. Write the domain and range in interval notation. So because this time around we don't have just a list of ordered pair for the function, we are going to have to write the domain in interval notation because it indicates that we have an infinite number of points, doesn't it? So take a look at the first problem. First of all, does this graph pass the vertical line test? So is it a function? Are you pretty happy and satisfied that it is? And if you recall from our previous video, if we could draw a vertical line anywhere on the graph that connected two or more points, then that graph was not a function. And here you can see with our first graph that there is no 2 points that are one on top of each other, right? Okay, so this is definitely a function. To find the domain of a function, when you're given the graph, you're going to look left to right on the graph because our x values are represented by this horizontal axis, right? So I need to know what's the smallest value that my x can be here in this graph, and what's the largest value that my x can be here in this graph. And does my graph have points for all the x's in between those two values? And so you will see that our leftmost point is this one on the end here, right? That's our leftmost point, and that represents the x value -5. So x is -5 as the leftmost point there. Okay, and then our graph kind of comes along, and our rightmost point, now notice I'm not saying the highest point, I'm saying the point to furthest to the right. Turns out that in this case that is the highest point, but that won't always be true. So our rightmost point happens at x equals to 1. Okay, now notice also that there's little solid dots there on each of those points. So that means that we include that ordered pair as part of the graph. If you recall from our work with inequalities in previous chapter, we would put an open circle if we didn't want to include that endpoint. Okay, but these are solid endpoints, so we are including both points. So to find the domain, we're going to, because we're including both points, we know we're going to use brackets. And again, this should be tying back a little bit to the work that we did with linear inequalities in a previous video. So please, if you need a little review, go back to that video, and that was located in our chapter 2. Okay, so our domain is going to go from an x value of -2, and then I have ordered pairs that cover every single x value till our rightmost value of 1. So my domain is going to be that this graph has ordered pairs for all the x's between and including -5 and 1. I know that's going to seem a little strange for a while until you get the hang of it, and you may have to actually rewind and watch this video a couple of times till you get this idea. Okay, that's our domain. Our range is the set of all outputs. So now we're going to look at y values. So our range, those are the outputs. Those are the y values. So this time around, we are going to be looking at our graph, and we're going to take special notice of the lowest point and the highest point. Okay, so remember the x value for domain, we looked left to right. smallest to largest, looking left to right. For the range, we're going to look from lowest point to highest point, looking from down to up. Okay, because remember that our output is measured on the vertical axis, right? So we go up and down. So our lowest point, well, it does happen at that same endpoint that we've already looked at once. So here's our lowest point here on the far left. And what's the y value there? It is a -4. And because of the solid dot, we do include it. So we'll put a bracket on that. And then our highest point also happens at this other endpoint. And the y value there is 2. And it is included with a solid dot. So we put a bracket. So again, a recap. For the domain, we go left to right. For the range, we're looking at the graph from lowest point to highest point and describing the y values. Okay, let's try this again with number 2. And again, if you're feeling a little confused here, that's pretty normal. This is a little bit of a more intricate concept for students, especially if they haven't seen this before. Okay, so here's our second graph. Take a look at that. And again, we're going to look at domain. We're going to go left to right on the graph. And so left to right, we go from this right here is our leftmost. Can I put LM? Will you understand? Leftmost point. And then over here, this is our rightmost. I'll put RM. Okay, those are my own initials, but just if that helps you. So now leftmost and rightmost, and there's no holes in between, so that's good. Nicely, all of the x values are represented. Then tell me what x value happens at this order pair that's at the far left. Yes, you're right, it is -2. And do we include -2? Yes, we do, because it's a solid dot, so there's going to be a bracket. Then put your comma. Now go to the rightmost point, which is this one over here, and describe it with the x value. So what x value is there? Yes, that's a 4. And do we include it? Yes, we do. So we put a bracket. Okay, so leftmost to rightmost gives you your domain. Okay, now we're going to look for range. All right, so I'm going to erase these. And now I'm looking for lowest to highest. And then again, domain goes with x, and then range is with y. But we're looking for lowest to highest. So which one's our lowest point? This one down here, isn't it? Lowest point. Lowest. Okay, so tell me what the y value is there. Tell me what the y value is there. It's a -5. Okay, and then we include the -5, so we put a bracket because there's a solid dot there. Okay, which one's the highest point? Think carefully here. Think carefully. Don't get swayed. It's way up here, isn't it? It happens in the middle of the graph in there somewhere, doesn't it? It's not at an endpoint. Do you see that? So what y value is that highest point? It's 3. So you're going to put a 3 here. And do we include it? Yes, because the graph goes through that point. It actually reaches the value of 3. So once again, notice, I'm going to keep repeating myself till it sinks in. Domain, you go left to right on your graph, and you're looking at x values, okay? Describing it in terms of x. Range, you're looking at lowest to highest on your graph, and you're looking at the y values there. And again, it doesn't have to be at the endpoints. Just go lowest to highest. Okay, let's look at a couple more. Take a look at this one now. Is it a function? Does it pass the vertical line test? Yes, it does. Okay, domain. Domain, left to right. Leftmost to rightmost point. Okay, so let's look at this graph. Aha, the leftmost point is right here, isn't it? This little vertex there. Okay. And what is the x value there? So did you notice the scale? So this is a 2, right? Okay, you got to pay attention to the scale, don't you? Okay, and do we include that 2? Yes, we do. So there's a bracket. So bracket 2. Okay, what's the furthest to the right that this graph goes? Oh, did you notice the arrow? Did you notice the arrow? So guess what? This graph keeps going. So what do you think we're going to put in that interval notation? Yeah, you're right. It is infinity. And then remember that infinity always gets parentheses. It does not get a bracket. So there's your domain. Okay? All right, how's that feeling? Okay, we're going on to the range. The range, you're looking at lowest point to highest, and you're describing it in terms of y. It's got to be described in terms of y. So the lowest point happens to be this point again, isn't it? It's the same point this time. Okay. All right. So what's the y value there? Be careful. Heads up here. Do not tell me 2, right? That's the x value. I want the y value for range, and the y value is 0, and it is included, so 0. Okay, tell me about the highest point. Is there a highest point? No, because this graph will keep increasing. That arrow again, this graph will keep increasing. I know it's increasing kind of slowly, not really fast, but it's going to keep increasing. So what do we put there? You're right, infinity. Okay, starting to get the hang of it? Okay, one more here for you. This one I'm going to have you try. Take a look at that one. Okay, you try domain and range. Pause for a minute. And then we'll talk about it together. Just pause it for a minute. Give me your best guess. Even if you don't think you know how to do it, just kind of guess. Take a minute and write something down on your paper and guess what you think the domain and range are. And then I'll pause when you're ready to check your answer. Okay, did you try it? Okay, we're going to do it together now. I'm going to explain it here. So now, when you looked for the leftmost point, what did you notice? Did you notice an arrow? Yeah, right? And so that means that this domain keeps going that way, right? And so what do we put when our number line points towards the left like that? Yep, negative infinity. You're right, it's negative infinity. Now I know sometimes my students think, but wait a minute, that arrow's going up, it's pointing up positive. Yeah, but that is the y value, okay? We're looking at the x values for domain, and that arrow is going to the far left of the graph. So that's where negative infinity is. Do you see what's happening? Okay, what about the rightmost point? Yes, I bet you got this one. Positive infinity. So as a matter of fact, anytime that you see this notation, negative infinity to positive infinity, I know you know, but I'm going to remind you that that means all real numbers. So all real numbers for domain for this graph. Okay, wonderful. Now what about the range? Now we're going to look at y values. We're going to look at the lowest point to the highest point. Now this one does have a lowest point, doesn't it? It's right here. Do you see the lowest point? Lowest point, LP. Ha, I know. I'm into initials today. Okay, so lowest point, right? And then we have to describe the y value there. So what's the y value there? Yeah, you're right, it's 4. So 4 goes with a bracket, and that's the lowest point. But what's the highest point that this graph gets to? Okay, that's where you are noticing the arrows pointing up, and so this goes to infinity, and infinity always gets a parenthesis. So how did you know, how close were you on your guess? Okay, again, for these particular problems, practice is key because it may take a little while for it to click the concept in your brain, but once it clicks, then you can do them fairly easily. And I want to encourage you that if you're still a little bit confused with this, do reach out to your instructor, okay? So they can help you with this. This is not an easy concept. Great work today.